everyone, it's Sevi. In this video, I'm continuing my discussion of Nahida's team comps with an in-depth guide of her Quicken, Aggravate, and Spread teams. If you haven't checked out my previous Nahida guide where I discuss her kit mechanics and build options, you can watch it first, since this video is a direct continuation of that and will assume you know how her abilities work. With that, let's get into Nahida's Quicken teams. In concept, Quicken teams are very simple. Inflicting the Quicken aura is achieved by reacting Denjo and Electro, and the aura stays until it expires or gets renewed. So in a Quicken team, you just need at least one Denjo and one Electro, plus flexible slots that are also Denjo or Electro, or elements like Geo and Animo which don't disrupt the Quicken aura. Attacking an enemy with Quicken allows for Aggravate reactions with Electro applying attacks and Spread reactions with Dendro, which simply increases the damage caused by the attack that triggered it. That being said, even teams as simple as Quicken can have some nuances and optimizations for the characters to work together more smoothly, so I'm going to cover her various Quicken teammates and synergies for 4 stars and 5 stars alike. However, there is a certain quirk that Nahida introduces with Quicken teams because, funnily enough, she's too strong of a Dendro applicator. Yes, that's right, she's too good for her own good sometimes. That's because her skill applies a lot of Dendro, which affects how Electro auras can stay on enemies. To simply demonstrate, I'll use Dendro MC's skill, then use Lisa's normal and charged attack to apply Electro twice. Even after Quicken is procced, there is an Electro aura alongside the Quicken aura. Now let's try it with Nahida. I'll cast Nahida's skill and then use Lisa's normal attack. This procs Quicken, but the Quicken also triggers Nahida's Tri-Karma, resulting in spread damage because Dendro is being reapplied. Because of that extra Dendro app, using Lisa's charged attack procs another Quicken but still leaves no Electro aura afterward. So why can this create a problem? If it's difficult to maintain an Electro aura, Animo units would also have difficulty swirling Electro. Referring back to our previous clips, Sucrose is able to swirl Electro when we use DMC, but not when we use Nahida. Being unable to swirl Electro means you won't get swirl-related buffs. For an Archaic Petra-built Geo unit, it'll also be difficult to crystallize Electro crystals to activate the artifact effect. This wasn't an issue with DMC or Cole, so it's a bit more convenient with using them. However, there are workarounds for Nahida teams that can alleviate the issue of maintaining Electro aura on enemies. The simplest one is to have at least 2 sources of Electro, which increases your chances of applying Electro between Tri-Karma procs so that the Electro won't be consumed right away. Throughout this video, I'll be sharing tips on certain teams and rotations that will still enable your Animo unit to swirl Electro even with Nahida on the team. I can't showcase every possible team rotation, but hopefully this will give you some idea of how to formulate your own rotation and workarounds depending on your team comp. You can also choose to not play in rotations or even ignore the Electro aura thing, and that's fine. Some of these teams, as long as they're invested in sufficiently, can still clear even with a loose order of abilities. However, this guide is about optimizing your experience, and as such, having aligned cooldowns and rotations do make for more fluid and guided gameplay and can add an element of satisfaction. With that in mind, let's first cover 15-second rotation teams featuring DPSs with short cooldowns that align, like Yae, Keqing, or Fischl. We're using 15 seconds as the guideline since Nahida has a burst cooldown of 13.5 seconds, so her teammates will revolve around that. Previously, Cole was the Dendro support that slotted in short rotation teams because of her also short burst cooldown, but clearly Nahida is generally a huge upgrade from her. She deals a lot of damage herself, has a more convenient way to maintain Quicken uptime, and gives the on-field unit a huge EM buff. For the on-field Electro DPSs, our top 2 candidates are Keqing and Yae Miko. Keqing has a 12-second burst cooldown, so she's obviously compatible, but then you might wonder why Yae when she has a 22-second burst cooldown. It's actually her skill turrets that have a 14-second duration, and those will be her main sources of damage. And when it comes to her burst, you will instead burst every other rotation. This also makes her ER needs way less demanding since she doesn't have to burst on cooldown. However, these teams are very pressed for a healer or shielder teammate to survive. We're looking for ones that also align in a 15-second rotation team. I guess I can mention that if you're okay putting Prototype Amber on Nahida, then at least you have the healer role filled up. But would you really be okay with that? Anyway, for the second Electro slot, the most compatible options are Fischl, who, as we all know, is insanely good in single target aggravate damage and for her battery utility, and Kuki Shinobu for healing and being another DPS with an aggravate build, which is recommended for this type of team. If you have them both, combining Kuching and Yae can technically work too. But what if you don't have Yae or Kuching? Well, if you have Fischl and Kuki, they can also be your two Electros instead as a more budget-friendly comp. Technically, you can just keep one Electro on the team and fill the third slot with a second Denjo like Kole, whose cooldown matches the rotation, but to capitalize on aggravate damage, go for the double Electro. Then for the fourth slot, this has more flexibility depending on your available units. It can be a third Electro from the previous options. If you go for a third Electro, it's a very easy to use team and the rotations are very loose. Or it can be an Anemo unit. Kazuha, Venti, and Heizo are the ones that fit in 15-second rotations. They're holding the Viridescent Venerer for Electro Resistance Shred, but they can also trigger aggravates themselves by infusing their Anemo abilities with Electro. Sayu and Jean can be forced as your Anemo units if you really need a healer. However, since they have 20-second burst cooldowns, you'll end up using their burst every other rotation. Or you could comp in a Geo teammate. Right now, the viable ones are Zhongli, who is clearly best for comfort and survivability, which makes a healer unnecessary, plus his valuable resistance shred, or Beidou, who can work to give consistent off-field damage, an EM buff for his teammates, and some crystallized shields. Now let's go look at these sample team showcases and rotations. This team is very tight because being off timing will cause Yae's turrets to expire too soon before she bursts. We're starting with Yae's turrets that apply Electro for Kazuha to swirl and infuse. Then Nahida uses her skill in burst, and we quickly switch to Kuki to aggravate her skill in burst. Then Kazuha can swirl Electro again, which can now cause aggravate damage too. Then quickly switch to Yae and burst. If the steps are in timing, Yae will have all three follow-up strikes. Repeat the rotation as needed. Then here's a team showcase that uses all 4-star teammates to accompany Nahida. It's not as comfortable, but still very workable.
Fracture! Yeah!
Hey, well! Lightning terrified! Our bond is strong!
Confess!
Everyone hold hands! The Temple of Wisdom!
Midnight Phantasmagoria! Truth hurts!
I see everything!
We've mainly been talking about aggravatingly good Electro units up till now, but let's not forget our first dedicated Dendro DPS, Tighnari, who also slots best in 15-second rotation teams. Before Nahida, Tighnari's possible Dendro supports were Dendro Traveler and Kole. While they contributed very little personal damage, their best role was to hold the Deepwood set or Instructor set. But they weren't necessary, as you could replace them just with another Quicken Team compatible unit who can contribute a lot more damage or other support utilities. Nahida, however, definitely brings a good deal of spread damage to the table. Since Tighnari has a quick swap playstyle and the ability to keep his charged attack time reduction mechanic even if he switches, it's very easy to swap Nahida in and out to reapply her skill if a new wave of enemies spawns. Nahida can even get in some normal and charged attacks once Tighnari has fired off his arrows, which also helps Nahida catch some Dendro particles. For Electro units, the best ones to consider here are those that we mentioned in the earlier section to match Tighnari's own short cooldown. These would be Fischl, Yae, Kuki, or Kuching. Then for flex slots, I mostly recommend Zhongli if you have him, who can shred both Dendro and Electro resistance. You can technically slot in another Dendro or Electro unit too. While you can bring in a VV Anemo unit for swirling and crowd control, they will only be able to buff and swirl Electro, not Dendro, unless you actually make them hold the Deepwood set. And trying to swirl with only one source of Electro on the team can be very troublesome or even not worth the effort. This sample rotation is very straightforward, and it's all a matter of getting their abilities out to apply quicken and mostly spread damage.
Can't see? Let's nip that in the bud.
Yeah! This might hurt a little.
Order guide you.
Midnight Phantasm! Commit it to memory!
Now that we've covered short rotations, let's see the more standard 20-second rotation that now allows us more team building options. For characters that still have 12 or 15-second cooldowns, putting them in a 20-second rotation is fine. They might have slight downtime in their abilities or take more on-field time doing attack combos. You can also give Nahida more on-field time to fill in the 20-second rotation and trigger added spread reactions. Dendro Traveler was the go-to Dendro support for 20-second rotations, but just like with Cole, Nahida offers a lot more too. Your choices for on-field Electro units are Lisa, Yae, Keqing, and Cyno, which will be discussed in more detail. Then there are more quick swap off-field units like Fischl and Kuki as mentioned before, and now Beidou as well, who's great in multi-target scenarios. There are other Electro units I know I've yet to mention, but that's because I recommend them less in a Quicken Aggravate playstyle. Obviously, I can't and won't stop you if you want to use them in that particular way, but here are reasons why I would personally not do so. For Raiden, while you can technically use her as an Aggravate on-field DPS, it faces stiff competition with her Hyper Raiden playstyle, where you can simply just switch the Dendro unit with Bennett, and he simultaneously does attack buffing and healing already. It's not unworkable by any means, but it's also not especially suited for her kit. For Kujo Sara, she can be very clunky to slot in rotations, especially without constellations. More so, she has poor Electro application and her buff time is quite short. She might make a better case if she's C6, but even then, slotting an Electro that synergizes more with an Aggravate playstyle is just way better for damage and ease of gameplay. And for Dori, well, Kuki exists. You've probably been using Dendro Traveler already to play your preferred Aggravate units. In such cases, Nahida team rotations are basically as simple as replacing Dendro Traveler's skill and burst timings. Let's see some sample team showcases and rotations. This team has a very straightforward rotation that I just lifted from my Lisa guide and replaced Dendro Traveler with Nahida. Zhongli is not using an Archaic Petra in this scenario, so I don't have to worry about catching his crystallized shields. If yours is, then you'll have to adapt the team rotation so that he's crystallizing the Electro aura, which might have some inconsistencies. The next team incorporates Sucrose as the Animo Flex slot with a 20-second cooldown. The timing would be inconsistent to swirl and infuse Sucrose with Electro, but since we have Fischl and Beidou as Electro applicators, you can brute force the Electro application by their abilities, making it more likely for Sucrose to swirl and infuse.
Eyes on me! The Temple of Wisdom!
As you wish, me.
Absorption test. Enhanced Animal Module 75.
One issue you might notice with longer rotations with multi-wave enemies is that when a new wave spawns, you will want to swap in Nahida to apply Dendro on them right away. It's a bit different with Dendro Traveler's Burst since that stays on the field for a while and so can automatically apply Dendro to a new enemy wave, while Nahida really needs manual reapplication. Most Electro units don't have an issue with this since they can quick swap in and out without sacrificing too much in the rotation, but this can be an issue for Cyno in particular, who loses his burst state when swapped out before it expires. Speaking of a Cyno and Nahida lineup, Nahida's skill lasts quite long but her burst doesn't without a Hydro or C1, so her burst may be the last ability you want to apply before activating Cyno's burst, since the EM buff from it will boost Cyno's damage significantly. The rotation here simply sets up the team's abilities before entering Cyno's burst window. If you're using an Animo to swirl Electro, you should also be aware already that the VV resistance shred effect only lasts for 10 seconds and cannot be renewed if the user doesn't trigger a swirl while on field. So there will be some part of Cyno's on-field attacks that will no longer enjoy the VV debuff. But considering the Electro aura situation with Nahida's skill, to avoid this headache you can just opt for another element than Animo in the flex slot. For the last team, I'd be remiss to not mention the team some of us have been waiting for a long time, which is a full Archon team. I did mention earlier that I wouldn't recommend Raiden for Aggravate damage in particular, but putting together the four gods still composes a competent Quicken team. In this team, Zhongli shreds resistance and shields you, Venti will crowd control and infuse his burst with Electro, which adds more aggravate damage. It just might be tricky to infuse his burst with Electro if Nahida's skill is active, since Raiden can't apply Electro fast enough to make an Electro aura coexist with Quicken, so that's something you'll have to be aware of. And that concludes my in-depth discussion of Nahida's Quicken Teams. She's an amazing unit to slot in this template, though her strong Dendro application does introduce some kinks with certain interactions. There are nevertheless achievable workarounds to manage or avoid them. For my next Nahida guide, I'll be tackling Nahida in Bloom-based teams, which will cover Bloom, Burgeon, and Hyperbloom reactions. So be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications for when that arrives. Comment down below if you've been playing Nahida in Quicken Teams. I would love to know. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, and I will see you all soon. Take care!